Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallas. For those of you who are new to the show is all about helping the information security community raise awareness, influence behaviour, and foster an appropriate organisational culture where security is truly valued. The format of the show is to basically engage with people outside of the security industry who are specialists either from a research or practitioner perspective, or maybe even a combination of the two, helping other industry sectors, other disciplines to actually tackle the challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture. Because to be quite frank, the challenges that we see within the industry are challenges that many other industries, many other professions have been looking at and tackling to a degree successfully over the years. So what we wanted to do was to bring those insights in and share them with the community. Every fourth guest on the show is actually one of our listeners. It could be you. And they come on the show and they basically share with us what they've learned from the previous 3 podcasts, but also share some insights into their own experience of the challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture. And that's what today's show is all about. If you would like to come on the show and provide some insights and to share what you've learned from the previous 3 podcasts, and the best way for you to get in contact with us is by dropping me an email at podcast@re-thinking the human factor. That's all one word other than the dash.com. So let me just repeat that again to you. That's podcast@re-thinking the human factor.com. Drop us an email. Let us know that you'd be interested in having a chat. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And we will then do our best to line up a call, and we'll give you a call and just have a chat and see about getting you on the show. So, without further ado, let's get on with the interview. And today's guest is Craig Thomson. Hello and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallas. And it's an absolute privilege today to have Craig Thomson join us. Now, Craig, the first time I heard of Craig probably doesn't even know this, was on holiday in France. That's right. There I was trying to get away from work, and I ended up getting involved in the conversation with somebody, and we were talking about the challenges of education and awareness. There I was trying really hard to get away from work, and they mentioned Craig. And when I returned back to the UK, I was on LinkedIn, and then I came across Craig. So, yeah, from a conversation in southern France through to a conversation today on the podcast. And so, hi, Craig. Thanks very much for joining us on the show.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for asking me on. I'm really interested and even more intrigued now that you've just given me that introduction.
So, Craig, really good of you to take some time out of your busy day to come onto the show and share your insights and some of the thoughts you've had of the last 3 episodes, which were with Susan, Stella, and Hillary. Now, before we actually start, I always ask our guests, any of our listeners that come on the show, to sort of like just give us who are you? What is it you do? What's the journey that you've been on that sort of led you to your current role and current position?
Well, where do I start with this one? It kind of feels as if I fell into security awareness, if I'm being honest. I'm not a technical security expert in any way, shape or form, although I have a security background. I spent almost 22 years as a Royal Marine, primarily in the training space and learning and development, and then when I left, moved into working with the European Space Agency and working with astronaut training. So used to working very much with people who had to do things in a high risk environment. Really had to make sure you get the point across when you're trying to deliver training and change behaviors and attitudes. But then, somewhere along the path, I came back to the UK from working at the Space Agency and found the current role, which is in security awareness. I remember when IT first came in, and from my perspective of IT and computing, I just thought, great, I've got PowerPoint. I can create something that's engaging and from a training and visual perspective, instead of having to do the juggle of using overhead projectors and videos and slides.
So, were you using those I still remember this with the projector. You had those like cardboard pieces, and then there was like almost like a piece of perspex, and you used to draw everything on the piece of perspex, which went in the cardboard, and then you put that up on the projector, turned it on, and then it would throw it up on the wall. Were you using that type of material?
Yes, it was, and very, very particular techniques for using the overhead projectors to make sure that the shadows were the right way around when you were using them, and that the reveal wasn't too early so that people weren't reading too much before they're supposed to see it. And a little bit more technical and a little more to it than you'd probably think. Yeah.
That's even with simple assets. You've got to know how to use those assets. You've got to know the strengths of the asset and the weakness, and then you've got to design your processes and how you, I guess, as a person that's presenting, whether it's just a pure presentation or some form of training, you've got to know how to do that. And the reveal, if you suddenly put everything up on the projector, you lose people because they're reading through all the other stuff, and you want them to concentrate on point one, don't you? So it's experience, and experience counts.
But however, sadly, that seems to have been lost now with PowerPoint, because everyone just uses it. Everyone just uses it as I say everyone, that's a broad brush. But a good majority of people just put all their things that they want to say on the screen and just stick it up there, and then they've lost the audience straight away because they're too busy reading point 5 instead of listening to point 1. Yeah.
You've come from quite a diverse background there. I mean, with the Armed Forces and Royal Marines, the L&D side, I just want to explore this a bit because I've got a connection with the Armed Forces, and I just noticed actually the particular regiment that my dad was in, they've just started putting, there's a program back on the TV, or TV, online, TV, whatever, and they're talking about the recruitment process. And actually, I think there's no problem showing with people. So, this is the parachute regiment. And I remember many, many years ago, there was another program about the parachute regiment, about junior company. And it's interesting seeing the difference now between the sort of teaching, developing these people, sort of instructing them on their behaviours and in some quite stressful circumstances. And I remember the old program, and I look at the new program, and you could sort of, there's a string of commonality through it all, but there's quite different approaches. Do you think that you've seen that when you're sort of within the armed forces, that things have developed in terms of how you train people, whether they be the recruits or right at the top of the chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can go back to the time of saying when I joined up, and then when my predecessors joined up, it was a different approach, and the times evolve, and we use different techniques. And thankfully, it's an intelligent organisation. A lot of people would think that they have the stereotypical armed forces picture in their mind of somebody standing on the edge of the parade square shouting and telling you to do it until you got it right. Sometimes there's an element of that included, if I'm being honest, from memory. But it's a very much more an intelligent organisation now, and the approaches that are used are far different. It's more about, it's a realisation actually from the organisation and from the trainer's perspective that their job is to train people. It's easy to get rid of people. It's easy to make people fail, but actually your job isn't about that. It's about trying to get people through it and trying to actually make sure that they can do what it is that you want them to do. Yeah. And it's taken a very scientific approach over the last few years. It really has.
Well, I guess one of the things, getting good people to sign up is a challenge. I mean, the competing, there are opportunities other than the armed forces. I know it was one of the challenges that the armed forces found was, how do we get the right people to sign up? And then once you've invested in doing that, and I think in the UK they actually outsource that contract to somebody to actually help try and pull more potential recruits into the pipeline. You don't want to lose them. It's an investment. You've already made the investment, getting them to sign up to doing something, and you then want to make the most of that commitment. So it's flipping the coin around and say, look, this is about retaining people, but developing them so that we can retain them justifiably and maintain our standards within the armed forces. So you want to protect that investment. Going on to the next one. So space travel. I've just taken the children last weekend to the UK's Space Centre. And
And so this is quite topical. And I've never met anybody that's actually done any training within the context of space. What is it? What was it you actually doing there?
So are you talking about from... okay, so probably the best way to put it is... so one of my experience of it was the European Space Agency had historically sent its astronauts out to work with NASA. Right. And you may remember astronauts like Pierre Sellers and Helen Sharman, have you, who had been to space, but they went badged with the Stars and Stripes on their arm, as it were.
Yeah.
They wanted to actually put their own astronauts from Europe through training and send them up into space with their own nation's flags on their arms. So want to basically develop something that they could actually use initially and then continue to use as they go forward. So luckily they decided to do that just at the time I was leaving the armed forces, and right place and right time, and very, very fortunate. I still consider myself to be very fortunate to have had time working with them. And it was looking at delivering a baseline of training topics to all of the recruits, and it seems strange calling them recruits, but to all of the astronaut candidates, to bring them to a baseline level. Some were pilots, some were ex-military, some were commercial pilots, and some were scientific. So it was about getting them all to a baseline in the space fundamentals and life sciences and what you'd expect. But thereafter, and concurrent with that going on from a experience of what I had, was we had ongoing training going for the astronauts that were going up to the International Space Station,
right?
Who were basically going up for a 6-month mission. Needed specific training that was relevant to the task they were going to perform when they were on board.
Yeah, when you talk about that, and you sort of illustrate it in that way, the whole idea of having a baseline, and then you have people that, then you have different levels of training for people that was almost progressing through the overall program. It sort of reminds me of the idea, the argument within cyber anyway, the whole idea that everybody's got to, we've got to have a baseline for everybody within the organization. These are the common lessons that, and takeaways and skills that everybody needs to have. And then we need to be thinking about how our program, focuses more upon the specific requirements of groups of individuals or individuals. Have you found that sort of, that what you did there at the European Space Agency there's a natural, it's baseline, build upon, doing something similar in your current line of work?
Absolutely. And you know what? It's almost as if it fell into place from a program approach. You could say by accident, but I think it's actually just a natural from experience. It's just a natural way to go when you look at military and then you look at the space and then you look at learning and development as such. When you're looking at an audience or an organization, it's let's get the basics right. Let's go back to basics. Let's make sure we get the fundamentals right across the organization, and then let's focus on doing the more specific, more technical aspects for our different audiences, for our high risk audiences. It always comes back to, you can design the most amazing building, house, structure, whatever it is, and you can build it as high as you want. But if you haven't got the foundations right for that building, it's going to topple. And it's going to be wasted investment and wasted time. So, yeah, I think it absolutely is, from experience, it's the approach that I would endorse. And it's the approach that we actually take.
At your current employment. So that leads on nicely. Are you cool with mentioning who it is, what your current role is, and who it's with? Or you can just mention one and not the other. So let the audience know who's benefiting from all that experience.
Oh, absolutely. I was very fortunate to find the role of the Security Education Awareness Manager at Nationwide Building Society. It was one of those things that when I'd left the military and, as I say, I'd had different other jobs. One of the transitional issues is trying to find not only the job that you can do, but actually working for an organisation that's got values that you can connect with. And Nationwide is a really good employer to work for. Mm-hmm. That's not a punt, but if anybody wants to take it, they can look at the website.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because culture is a big piece of what I do, and understanding the role of values within culture, and then actually finding an organisation where you have shared values. Now, for our listeners in the UK, they're probably familiar with the concept of a building society, and in the US they might be, but a building society, just can you briefly explain, because a building society is definitely different from a bank, even though quite a few of the services are quite similar. So could you just quickly, what's a building society? Why is it different to a bank?
I think the easiest way to put it, and the way we focus on it, is the fact that the building society is a mutual, and that mutual, all the so-called customers from a bank's perspective are members when you look at it from a mutual and a building society's perspective. So actually, if you have savings, or you have a mortgage, or you have a current account, as things have progressed now, then you are a member of the organisation, and therefore you are not considered to be a customer where you are picking up an end product. But actually the benefits of you doing your business with that organisation are actually going to somebody else. Now, the benefits of a building society are that actually the money that you invest generally comes back to you.
Is there anything within the building side, discussions to go on, which sort of highlights the difference between being a member of something and being a customer? And I asked this specifically, people go, where's Bruce going with this? But I often think about...
I think I know where you're going.
Right. Okay, in which case, rock and roll. Go with it.
I think we're probably looking at the fact that people have got vested interest. They feel as though they're part of an organisation. They feel as if they can benefit from being a part of that. And instead of just going to a bank and depositing your money and getting loans and getting your mortgage and all the rest of it, and your money goes out and you're getting a service from a bank that you don't generally have much say in how it does its business. When you go to a building society, you've almost got the opportunity to have your say and put your piece in, go along to events where you have the opportunity, where you're invited to come and have your say and talk to the senior leadership team. And, you are rewarded for loyalty, that when you put in your money, that you actually get extra benefits and better rates coming back to you. So it's kind of that same connection with security awareness, that actually and I think that's probably what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. That's really, really good. Yeah,
when you get that vested interest, when you've got that vested interest from all people within the organisation, then what you're looking at there is you're looking at a mutual. It's a two-way process, whereby actually, if you work together, you will get the benefit for each, and you'll get. And actually, it connects with one of the things I picked up going through the last 3 podcasts. Were quite a few of the things in there that relate to how we can be more effective and how we can be better at what we do. And I always hark that back to my experience from leadership and management, and to Stephen Covey and his effective habits, or the habits of effective people. And one of those is to think win-win. If you're in that mutual organisation, or they in that mutual agreement, you are going to think win-win. And if you're going to think win-win, you're going to be more effective and you're going to get better output. So I think that's where tell me if I'm wrong. I think that's where you were headed.
No, absolutely. And that's absolutely where I was going with that, with the sense of, do people feel different if they've got something in the game? From a sort of, I guess, from the sort of cognitive biases and heuristics type of perspective, what we're starting to talk about is, if somebody's contributed to something, if they've invested in some way, they feel that they've contributed to something, they're going to value it potentially more than it's actually worth, even. I mean, that's not saying that that's the case with mutual building societies at all. There's a sense of, I think it called, when I did the interview with Dan a little while ago now, we were talking about the IKEA effect, where, when you build something yourself, you tend to value it more than if somebody else built it. Because you've invested in it. And then there's other things like the endowment effect. Again, it's about how you've invested into something. But you mentioned there about what you started taking away from the last 3 podcasts. Do you want to just sort of explain, I guess, some key points that you've taken? I'll jot them down, and then we can sort of explore those a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a few. I mean, there's some great podcasts. As I say, I potentially should have found out about the podcasts and the network a little bit sooner than I did, but I'll probably put that down to the fact that I've been too busy racing around trying to actually make
difference.
trying to make a difference. Whilst having a steep learning curve in the IT world. There's some really good connections in there that I made, and thankfully they also fit along with the approach that we take as well. But you talked about how people have got that vested interest, and how using the people within the organisation to help shape and form what it is that we have as policies and processes so that they actually work. And it really means that people will, like you say, the IKEA effect, they will buy into it. I remember one of Covey's effective principles was seek first to understand. And that's right. If you go out to people and try and understand from their perspective, what is it about policies and processes that they don't understand, or that they do understand but can't affect, what's the blocker for that? What's creating what's potentially the cognitive dissonance between what they know they should be doing, but actually what they actually are doing. Or I found that really interesting. And thankfully, it's one of the things that we started to dedicate a lot more time and effort to where we are.
Do you think you going down that particular route because of it's just your experience, or when you're looking at designing these education and awareness sort of, I guess there's a program and then there's individual initiatives. Do you think that understanding that behavioural context, because you were talking there about design, I mean, really, engage with the stakeholders to develop policy. It's almost like a design process, engage with your customer to design the product.
Yeah.
And if you don't engage with your customer, the product that comes out at the end of it, the process, which then you as the education and awareness manager are sort of responsible for trying to embed within the organisation and change people's behaviours. It makes it a lot harder if you haven't had people involved in designing the product and then you try selling them the product in effect. Not a financial exchange, but you're selling in terms of the sense of their time to take part in the training, their effort to remember it, and then basically when they've got to actually choose to comply, they're making in many respects they're making a discretionary effort. Of course they said they should comply. We know that people don't always comply. So do you find that engagement makes a difference for you as the education and awareness manager, to get that job done and to achieve, the goals that have been set for you?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't about training and delivery of awareness activity, about making sure that you really target and make it real to the people that you're delivering to. It's about understanding what that need is. I've already mentioned about talking about the basics and getting the foundations right. But then when you start to look at different areas and what their need is, it's looking at actually, well, why have we got an area that isn't potentially doing what it is that we want them to do? So you've got to go out and identify what that is. And that comes from engagement. Now, there are different ways of doing engagement, and all organizations have it as a real challenge. Whether you put it out as a survey, and people say don't use the word survey, so we talk about a culture change and have your say, feed into it. We can call it what we want, but at the end of the day, we need to engage with the people within the business who we want to take on board the information that we need them to take on board to make it a more safe and secure. And it comes back again to one of the points that Susan did highlight, I remember, when she was talking about better design to work with the process that you put in place. And it's almost like saying, well, this is what the policy says, but actually, you can imagine talking to somebody when they first come on board, and you can imagine that conversation that goes on that says, well, this is what the policy says, this is what the process says, but you know what? This is what we actually do in real life. this is what we do. This is the way we do it. And, you know, I can recall personal experience back in my previous careers where we've done exactly that. You know, you look at something and say, right, this is what the book says, but you know what? When push comes to shove in real experience, this is what you do. So it's because that process, that theory hasn't been designed and developed close enough with the operational experience, or hasn't taken into consideration the other operational factors that create the confusion in your colleague's mind, which creates that dissonance, that piece of, wait a minute, I've got two different things that I need to focus on here. And I don't know which one takes priority.
So you mentioned there about cognitive dissonance. This is the difference between what the policy says in a way and what people actually do. And in that, you sort of, I guess, your root cause analysis for that is that the policy wasn't designed with the user in mind, and so it's great it comes out on paper, but actually things don't change on the ground because it's almost like the policy can't be implemented. What impact does that have then? I mean, that might be just one policy. What impact might that have in terms of how people interpret the broader range of policies that you as education and awareness manager are responsible for implementing? Does it create a barrier? As soon as you create one situation of non-compliance because the policy and real life just don't match up at all, does that then infect the rest? Is it like the bad apple in the cart that affects the rest of them?
Yeah, it can do. It's about are we creating a conflict with what we're asking people to do? And the old memory comes back to me when I'm thinking about what you were discussing with Louise, and it was about that security culture piece. And actually, do we want a security culture, or do we want an organizational culture that values security? And it's about security is not the be all and end all of an organization. It's there to provide a service. So when you have conflict of, do I need to provide a good service, or do I need to make sure that I'm being secure, then one takes priority over the other, because that's what we do. We make a cognitive decision as to which one takes priority, especially when we're under stress and we're under pressure. Mm-hmm. And I think actually we can create processes collaboratively, and that's not just looking at them in isolation from a security perspective, but actually looking at how that works with the operational processes and how transformation into the business thinks about its impact on all of those things, and we work together. Then we create processes and controls that people can actually follow, and that they've actually had the opportunity to feed into, because they're giving it to us from their experience of what it is they need to do, where the impact is going to be, and where it is they're going to be at conflict, where it is that they're going to have to make a decision and do something that's over and above or outside of the guidelines that we set from the security perspective. So, yeah, it really is that whole piece about trying to make sure that it's all tied in together, and that we don't create that cognitive dissonance and that conflict in the I don't like using the term end user, but in our colleagues' minds. We don't want to do that. Yeah,
it's interesting because it sort of highlights one of the ways to change behaviour is to reduce any friction. So if people are currently doing A and you want them to do B, but the process of moving from A to B is full of friction, people just don't want to pursue that. The way you design that sort of change across should be taking that friction perspective in mind. Just make it as easy as possible for somebody to move from A to B. And then, earlier we were sort of talking almost about the motivations, about what's in it for me. So that you mentioned the two-way process, and this is the benefit to us as an organisation from you following the security policy. But what's in it for the other party? Combine that then with, okay, actually, you or your department or your business function in some has been involved in the design of this process that we're now training you upon and asking you to comply with, and you start to add these things up, and for me that's when you then start to shift the balance in your favour that people will actually choose to comply with that policy. And I think that what you're just describing is almost like a little bit of an arc. And I'm seeing a small improvement here, improvement here, improvement here, and you're like, okay, this all eventually pushes the dial in the right direction in terms of how the chances that people are going to comply.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the fact that people are generally good. Are generally good in principle, and they want to do the right thing. Yes, and it's been discussed in some of your previous podcasts that the human is not fallible, and we often will take the easy route, or we'll take the non-conflicting route. But generally, they will do the right thing. So if we don't do the right thing, then we need to consider it. Why is it that people aren't doing the right thing? And 9 times out of 10, it's either because of we haven't created, we haven't given them the knowledge, the skills, and the tools that they need to do it, or we've created some form of conflict that prevents them from doing it.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you, in your experience, what is it that motivates people to actually? Well, you could either think it was give up their time to engage with awareness initiatives, or invest it. It depends which side of the coin you want to choose. But what is it that motivates people, what, in your experience, to take part in the first place?
I suppose we're all different, aren't we? And everyone has different motivators, and what's a reward for one person isn't for another. And what's considered to be an unpleasant outcome of an activity for one person is completely different to another as well. So I think generally we do things, or we'd like to think that people will do things because it's the right thing to do. And that for me has always been the focus of trying to get behavior change, is making people understand it's the right thing to do. Clearly, in different organizations, and specifically in the finance industry, there are regulations. There's a need to do it from a regulatory and legal perspective. But if you can get people to buy into the need to do it because it's the right thing to do, yep. and we can do that by storytelling. Making sure that we give people the real stories of how doing the right thing impacts on our members, for instance, in our case, but also actually how by doing the wrong thing, whether it be intentional or not, how the wrong thing can really have a massive impact on somebody's life. And this isn't just about how they can get their money or how they can't get their money. It can have an absolute influential impact on their life. And it may sound a little bit extreme, but it can be, especially when we start talking about data protection. So I think for some people, it's about trying to make sure you know what their driver is before you try and deliver that story, which gets the emotional connection to then get them to do what it is that you want them to do.
So part of awareness then is it's not just about making your audience aware. It's also, awareness is a two-way street, isn't it? It's about you as the education and awareness manager being aware of your audience. What are the stories that are going to be more compelling, more engaging for them? Something you mentioned earlier in the interview is, understanding, if the policy is this and people's behavior is that, then why is that? Understanding the root cause rather than just trying to push back. Just use the same process, whatever you've done before, to make people aware of the policy. Awareness is two ways, isn't it? And I think that's interesting because a lot of the conversation I see is that often awareness is pitched as this will make the audience aware of our policies, their roles and responsibilities. But could it be said that actually awareness is just as much about actually being aware ourselves of who our target audience is?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's about, and it comes back to that piece of, I think Stella talked about it from a learning and development perspective, about setting out from the outset what it is that you're trying to achieve, and setting out what your plan is. And it kind of comes back to Covey, with beginning with the end in mind. It's we need to know what it is that we're trying to achieve, but in order to do that, we need to focus on. So, yeah, you absolutely need to engage with different parts of the business, and all our users of IT and our service providers and staff within the organisation to understand what it is that they're doing and what it is that the risks are to them.
Yeah.
And this is the point, it's the risks. We all do things that could have an impact, but actually, what are the risks to that individual and what are the risks to the business?
Yeah.
So that you deliver something. And if sometimes we don't fully understand what the operational process is, we might think we believe we understand the impact of security and good security behaviors on a business area. But actually, if we don't understand the systems that they're using and the processes that they're using, then potentially we're not going to get it right in the first place. So yeah, we do have to understand what it is that they're doing and where they see the conflict and the issues, so that we can actually develop an effective program.
So it is, it's almost like a market research piece, isn't it? And the whole idea of understanding your market, your target audience, and conducting those research activities. You mentioned their surveys, and obviously you can name it. People use different names for basically the same mechanism for gathering information. And I'm just wondering whether or not you've got any experience and feelings around gathering information. Surveys, the natural one. It makes a sense from an economic perspective, but what are the weaknesses of surveys? And in all the work that I do, often survey comes out as the first natural response. We'll survey them, but a lot of my work has identified that there are some great times to use surveys, but there are also some times where surveys aren't necessarily going to bring you the results. So I just wondering what your experience of that market research is, how you've done that in the past. Surveys, workshops, what were the lessons that you learned from that?
The survey is a good tool, but sadly with a survey, we're all surveyed constantly, day in, day out. You go and buy something, and before you know it, you get an email saying, "How do we do?" You go and have your tyres changed, and then you get a text message saying, "How do we do? We're going to send you a few more messages." And we're almost at the point of saturation with surveys, and we've so much to do in our lives that people don't want to open them. And if they do, with the best of intentions, they open it up and they see a survey that's got 200 questions, they're not going to answer them.
Yeah.
And actually, people haven't potentially stopped to think about what do I want to be able to affect a change in when I get my survey results. So actually, what are the key things I want to focus on? And actually just creating it down to a few key areas rather than asking questions for the sake of questions. So, of course, you also then have corporate issues as to whether or not you can deliver that survey and whether you can reach your audience. But sometimes it's a different approach to actually look at trend analysis on, let's say, incident reports and identify that you're starting to see a trend where you've got an issue that you need to do a deep dive on. And then that gives you a more focused audience to go and talk to. And actually then you can try and sell that more as a case of, we've noticed this, so therefore, would you like to talk to us about it? We'll come face to face. Instead of having that survey piece where people have got to click on a link and open up all the questions, they're actually having a face to face, which helps build that trust element that you need as well across the business. And we found in the past that actually doing face to face workshops and trying to get feedback from people is really useful.
Yeah. And I think it's that one-to-one, isn't it? It's, pretty much everything is based upon human relationships, or it has been in the past. The whole thing about trying to automate discussion, relationship building with machines is something that's obviously it's been a hot topic for quite some time now. And I sometimes do wonder, will the machine, will you develop a relationship with a machine? So that the machine can be just asking the questions and gathering the information, interpreting your answers, that type of thing going forward. But in the meantime, that does, in my experience, that face-to-face, whether it's one-to-one or with a group of people, as long as the group isn't too big, and the person doing, and actually this is important as well, I think the person who's facilitating the workshop has got to have the right attributes and qualities.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think what you're talking about is that whole piece about trust and building trust and having that two-way conversation. And is when you're talking to somebody, do you consider them to be credible and reliable? And actually, although they might be positive attributes, and you look at the negative that could completely outweigh that, is self-interest. And if it's clear to somebody that they're going into a fact-finding mission, let's call it, so that one individual can go away and have gotten from that discussion exactly what they want, then if they get a sense that that's what they're there for, and it's not actually, I've got an opportunity to feed into this and give my say as a collaborative approach, then they're going to shut down. They're just going to think, well, you're just here just to look after yourself and to just find out what you want to deliver, potentially to tick a box or to impart on me what I don't want to hear in the first place. So absolutely, you've got to have those soft skills. And again, those soft skills are, as we've talked about before, that they're becoming more evident now that they're needed within the security industry, because it really is key that we can make that connection and we can build those relationships.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Feedback loops, because often we run workshops and we invite people and we say, look, this is your opportunity to come and share your experiences, what you like, what you don't like, all that stuff. So we create these workshop environments. We get people away from the desks. They invest their time. And it's sort of, the workshop comes to an end. The person that's facilitated it then pulls all the information together. So it's sort of a reflection of what you just said there. How important is it to give feedback to those attendees? If you've gone away with those, they've given you a whole range of justifications, motivations behind why they don't comply with policy X, even though they've been trained on it and they've passed a competency assessment. How important is that, giving feedback?
Extremely. And if you think about it, if somebody was to ask you your opinion and they went off and if somebody was to ask your opinion on what they wanted to do and you gave your opinion, they went off and actually changed their own mind and thought, no, I'll go with Bruce's advice, and they did what you asked them to do, you wouldn't necessarily know that they're doing it because of that. You could maybe make a connection and say, oh, I suggested that, but you wouldn't be able to have that reinforced approval to yourself that actually, do you know what? I gave that advice, they listened, and they did it. So maybe maybe my comments are worth something. Maybe I can actually feed into this and somebody will listen. So maybe it is worthwhile me feeding back and providing that information. Whereas if you don't make sure that people are aware that, and we use a process of, you said and we did, that they will just shut down. They will say, well, what's the point of actually making a comment if it doesn't get taken on board? So, and again, it comes back to that piece about investment. They feel that they've got an investment in what's going on because they've helped shaped the change. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that Stella mentions, and I guess I refer to quite a lot, is how the learning environment that and the difference between a learning environment and the actual environment where you're going to then have to remember what it is that you've been taught and then act upon it. And I thought, with your background, I was particularly interested because, going back to your time in the armed forces, the impact of stress in a given situation, it's quite well understood now, the impact of stress upon the brain's ability to think things through. And, other podcasts that we've had, and I know definitely with Susan's podcast as well, we talked about, when you get into that stress situation, how it's then fight or flight, which moving to a particular system within the brain. And that system has shortcuts, these heuristics, etc., which sort of overpower the cognitive reasoning side of things. I'm just wondering, in your experience there, was that your experience when you were sort of within the armed services, that sort of trying to train people? You can train them in the classroom, you can train them, out doing field craft, etc. But how do you train them in such a way so that when they're actually in the heat of it, okay, that they're still recollecting this stuff. They're still acting upon that. And I'm just wondering whether or not there is that difference, because I sometimes wonder, how we train people, the environment that we train people in, is that a reflection of the environment where people are going to be making decisions? And what difference does that make?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes all the difference. And it's from a training perspective. If you can create the environment in which you want people to behave, then it gives you the ability to actually observe them in that environment and be confident that that's what's going to happen. But it also allows the individual to know that they are able to do that. They can make that self-assessment. They can make that self-judgment that they've been asked to do something in a certain environment, they've done it, and therefore they know that they can do it. And that gives them an awful lot of self-confidence. If you're teaching somebody the theory, or this is what you should do in a certain situation, if they haven't experienced that situation, it's really difficult for them, one, to build up the effective habit of doing that over and over, because practice reinforces the behavior that you want them to do.
Yeah.
So if we can't do that because we don't have a specific scenario or a situation, then what we're really doing is relying on their cognitive ability to understand the situation that you're giving them, that you're telling them where it is necessary for them to behave. Now, we can all do that, and we can, with a clear mind, can say, okay, in that situation, I understand that this is what I'm supposed to do. If I haven't been practiced in that environment and in those conditions, then my brain won't automatically do something, or my brain won't automatically get me to do something as forming as a habit. Therefore, we're relying on people to actually stop and think about it.
Yeah.
And this is where there's a real challenge, because if we want people to stop and think, that is assuming they've got the time to stop and think.
Yeah.
If they haven't got this time to stop and think, and you talked earlier about the stresses and the pressures of the workplace, there are modern stresses and pressures, full stop. But then when we add in the journey to work, then when we add into coming into work and finding that your IT won't log on properly, then there's not being able to pull up your work so that you can get it finished for the deadline. Then you've got your boss shouting at you from one angle and then from another angle. You are building up workplace stress that will then affect your decision making. That stress can almost be overcome when you have done something over and over and over again in that condition in which to react. If you haven't had the benefit of being able to practice it in those same conditions, then there is a possibility that you won't actually do what it is that you know you're supposed to do, but you will revert to the easy route. And that's not from a lazy perspective. That's because actually you're potentially going into your flee mode. You've got your fight, flight, and flee mode. You potentially might go into your flee mode of saying, I'm not doing that, or I'm not doing that because it's confrontational. And humans want to go for the non-confrontational approach. So I suppose it's really, really difficult to get people to do what it is you want them to do if you haven't had an opportunity to practice it in that environment. So the environment and the conditions at which you want someone to do something is really, really valuable.
So, with that, the idea of practice, I guess, would it be sort of, I get your philosophy that the more exposure you can get to the to employees or whoever the stakeholder is that you're responsible for helping them sort of up the game when it comes to information security, that you need as much exposure as possible. And if that is sort of, I guess, your philosophy, how do you sort of deal with the challenge of, the pushback we all get from business, whether it's information security or any other business function that's trying to train people, is that we've only got a limited amount of time. You sort of seem to be stuck between the ocean and deep blue sea, in the sense that, oh, here we go, you've got one session a year, you've got one slot a year to deliver your training, because of all the other training that's taking place and how the business feels comfortable with releasing people from the front line, driving business, delivering business, doing the training piece. But actually, in your mind, you need to be doing this as regularly as possible. I I can only assume, and I'm pretty sure I'm accurate on this one, that's a challenge that you've always faced. And how do you have that discussion with the business to say, well, we need more time so that I can actually help form these habits?
Yeah, you're right. It's an absolute challenge. When you consider that security is only one aspect of what people need to be doing in their operational day-to-day business, it's trying to get their time to do any training or any engagement or awareness activity is time taken away from what it is they're there to do. And when other parts of the business are implementing their policies and their awareness of what it is they want people to do, it becomes a real challenge. I think we've all fallen into the category now of we deliver a one-stop shop that covers all of our security messages through e-learning, and partly because it is a useful tool, but actually it's effective at reaching a lot of people in different locations at the same time. Yeah. Yes, it also allows us to then demonstrate compliance, and we can say, yes, we've delivered the training that we need to deliver that has been asked for from a compliance and scheme perspective. But we should only focus on that one. And I say should. It would be more effective if people were to use that as delivering the key messages and then following that up continuously throughout the year with reinforcement, continuing that message. So we haven't got the opportunity to practice, and we can't get more time. So what we do is deliver our key messages in a one hit, but then reinforce that, continue to reinforce it throughout the year, and at particular key times throughout the year, when we want people to be doing that behaviour.
Have you ever sort of something that I did some time ago, but it seemed to be quite unusual, was instead of having my own education and awareness initiative campaign, I just piggybacked off everybody else's.
Do you know what? It's not a bad idea. And the reason I say it's not a bad idea is because none of us have got the perfect solution. And one of the most valuable things I've found about being in the education awareness from a security perspective, the network, through your podcast, through the summits that we go to regularly, is we're all doing the same thing. And it's relatively, and I say relatively new. There's the discussion about the fact that IT's been around for a long time and we've been doing IT security for a long time, but there seems to be a real initiative now on security awareness and talking to peers. We're all in the same boat. And when you talk to somebody else and you say, this is what I'm doing, and they say, oh, that's a great idea, I hadn't thought of that. Do you know, we're doing this, and you think, oh no, that's a good idea. And part of me's even had a thought about saying, well, actually, do you know what? We all have the same challenges, especially from a manpower perspective across the industry. Trying to deliver what we're trying to deliver is getting a joint approach where we say, right, if you focus on this year and I'll focus on that, at the end of it, we'll swap. And then we've got something that's built for purpose. Yeah,
absolutely. I know. I think this is one of the I think commendable activities from people like SANS, for example. I think they were ahead of the other major stakeholders, in this industry. For me, ISACA, ISC squared, etc. Around this human factor piece and recognizing the challenges that it is new. I mean, my personal view on this, and love your thoughts. Awareness, behavior, and culture aren't unique to cybersecurity. What area of life doesn't involve raising awareness to influence behavior? And there's an element of considering the role of culture in doing that. And that's one of the things we do with the show. That's why we go out there to engage with people who do awareness, behavior, and culture, but do it in a different context to cyber. And this is about the lessons that you can learn by just listening to other people. And you can, what you just given there is the lessons you can learn by listening to your peers, and it's about finding places where those peers are sort of gathering and exchanging ideas, and then and having this information sharing thing that goes on, and people coming up with ideas, and that's unusual. I mean, one of my favorite ideas for influencing behavior because nearly every project I got involved with in my early days around governance, risk and compliance was pretty much driven by, we're going for this tender. Okay. We need to be ISO 27001, or we need to make sure we've got to make assurances around data protection, or, whatever it was, any of the standards which are out there. And then suddenly that would be a motivation and provide momentum to actually doing something. You can argue the pros and cons about whether or not they got it just as a tick box or not. That's another issue. But it was the connection with money for business. Mm. One of the things I found really, really successful around third-party policy. So this is about trying to embed the third-party policy, getting people to think about what are the risks associated with this great idea that we've got before you get to the point. So instead of getting to we've engaged a supplier to deliver X, now security function. Could you just have a look at the security side of it? Can you just get this signed off? And actually, the thing that I did, which was one of the most effective pieces of behavioural change I did, I made sure that the budget approval for departments, involved the finance function asking questions about, so you want to do X, Y, and Z this year. Where's your risk assessment in relation to information security? And over this 18-month period, I remember them seeing that come through. The number of pushbacks they got was pretty significant, where people went, "Oh, we haven't done this yet." But when they started to realise the money would only come when it was done, it really, really changed. By the end of a year and a half, everything that was coming through in terms of a request for budget, they weren't seeing anybody that was saying, "No, we haven't looked at the information security angle." And it was just tying up those human motivations with this process. And actually, let's put that in the finance function, because they want the money and we want to give them it, but we want to make sure we're giving them it and they've understood the risk. And for me, that worked absolutely amazingly well. And it didn't require actually any form of education and awareness around third-party policy, in the sense that people were like, "Okay, we want the money. What is this? Right, let's get it done." And then it became a voice going, "We've got to do this, otherwise we're just going to get pushed back and we're going to be, a month, 2 months behind where we want to be as a department." So I found that really interesting. And I think this is the thing that I always try sharing with people. The behaviours we want can be influenced by the design of the processes as well. And good behavioural design is, I think that needs to be incorporated more in terms of how we develop these processes in the first place. And I think it then takes the pressure off education and awareness campaigns in that more traditional sense. And it means that you're not necessarily using up time that way, because it's already embedded within the organisation's process.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And if it's clear to people what it is you want them to do, I mean, often we tell our story by theoretical process or key activity, but actually what we don't do is we don't say, what does that mean for you? What exactly do you need to do? And if you know what you need to do, can you then self-assess the fact that you're actually doing the right thing and be confident that you're doing the right thing? Yeah.
So I think in Hillary's interview, one of the things she mentioned was the importance humans place upon a need for control. That our brains actually like to have this sense to predict what's coming up, sort of next, and there's this sort of survival instinct of the brain, and how that dictates our ability to respond to change. Because really, we think education awareness it's about, would you agree? It's about, changing things, increasing the levels of awareness, increasing the likelihood of an appropriate behaviour. Would you say that that's a true reflection of what education awareness is about?
Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, if what we're trying to do from security awareness perspective is change behaviour, then we're looking at change. And it is that piece that Hillary was talking about, that people need to understand what that change is and why it's being implemented and what it is that they need to do throughout that process. I think people feel threatened by change. By habit, generally, humans don't like change.
Yeah.
We're generally quite happy with the status quo, and when change is forced upon us, we're too busy looking at what we're going to give up rather than what we can achieve and what the benefits of the change are. So those are key things that people need to focus on. And we always try and focus on when we're trying to get that across to people. It's not just an awareness message that we deliver. It's actually what is the behavior that we want you to do, which is potentially a change from what you're already doing. And why is it that we want you to do that? What's the benefit of that?
Yeah. And through that process that you, in effect, what you're doing is you're giving people a sense of control over the change process in itself. Because I think one of the things that Hilary sort of highlighted, and I completely agree with her on this, is a sense of when people know there's something happening, but they don't know what that something is, they feel more out of control. That being out of control just increases your levels of anxiety and stress, and that then, as you were talking about earlier, that then has an impact upon your ability to reason and to cognitively think things through. So the process you're talking about, it is about empowering people. It's about giving them that sense of control over the situation to a certain degree, or at least knowing what the situation is rather than not knowing anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier, and actually what also Hilary was talking about, is the fact that if we don't do that, then what we're doing is we're creating a condition in which we are promoting anxiety, stress. People will feel threatened. They won't be in a position of clear mind to actually take that time to stop and think about what it is that we want them to do to make that change. They will essentially, we can say, either revert to type or revert to what it is that they are already doing. Mm-hmm. And they won't buy into that change. And that then is going to create an issue. It's going to create an issue. And of course, one of the things we've got as a problem in organizations in this day and age is that change is constant. And we seem to, if we look at the change cycle, we don't seem to ever get towards the end. We seem to go through. If we consider the house of change with our four rooms to go through, we get through 3 and then jump over the 4th one and jump back into room 1 again to carry on the whole cycle again. Yeah. So that creates an awful lot of anxiety and stress in a workplace, and it also doesn't allow us to stop and actually measure whether or not we've been effective with that change, which again comes back to the individual looking and thinking, well, you asked me to do this, I've started to do that, but now you're asking me to do this. Yeah, it creates massive conflict.
Now, this is a great point. I'm going to drop this question in because really what you were moving on to there is metrics, which is like a hot topic of mine, but I think it also ties back to the point you were making earlier about Stephen Covey, and he was talking about, in effect, setting your objectives right at the beginning. Yeah. And that's something that has been mentioned. I think it was in Susan and Stella's were also mentioning that, having a clear set of objectives before you start out on that journey. And it's interesting because when I speak to organizations, one of the challenges we have there is often there is education awareness manager comes on or CISO comes in, they're looking at education awareness and they want to deliver something relatively quickly because they want to show progress. But actually that doesn't really give you the time to actually sit down and really think these things through so that you're very clear about the objectives. And the other thing is, I can have my own set of objectives, but really my objectives are the same as the business's or objectives. And actually that process of having those conversations with the stakeholders to even define what you mean by awareness. What is it you mean by behavior? What is it you mean by culture? And actually that process of going through those things actually then starts to help people with painting the picture around metrics. What's your experience in terms of metrics, around what difference it makes to making your job easier in terms of getting the support you need within the organization? It doesn't make your job easier in terms of, because you've got to, that's something else you've got to be doing. But how important is the setting the objectives, the metrics, and how does gathering metrics effectively against those objectives enable you to sort of put your case forward that you're making good progress and that the next round of investment would be a wise investment?
Yeah, I think this is one that none of us are alone in the security awareness industry, because actually one of the most difficult things, whilst we can have training metrics of saying, yes, 95% of people have completed all their security training, what we find it very difficult to do, and that's generally because it is a difficult thing to do, is measure the impact on the behavior. And actually, we can say they've done the training, but actually, are they still doing it operationally? So having an operational metrics, that align to the risks that we see in the business. So if we look at our strategy and from a security perspective and identify what our risks are, then if those are our key risks that we need to be focusing on, then the behaviors that are linked to the controls of those risks are what we need to be focusing on to show that we can demonstrate are happening. So if we set those out as our end goal, that's what we want to see. We want to see people behaving this way. We want to see that, and that's going to feed into having less incidents in this, and it's going to feed into a positive security culture, because we're saying that actually if they're behaving that way, then they're obviously understanding or they have the right values, then we can demonstrate that we have got positive security culture. If we know what that looks like to start with, then that's what we set out as our objectives.
Right.
And it means that those are objectives that we have half a chance of trying to achieve, so that when we try and push to the senior leadership to say, this is what our program is doing and this is how we know we're making an impact, it's going to get that message across, and it's going to help with getting funding to continue the program.
When it comes to metrics, is the performance of an activity, so doing what you said you were going to do, a metric in itself, or is it about always just measuring the output from that activity? So, if we do X, that's going to result in Y. So I'm interested in this because one sort of demonstrates effort, the other one demonstrates result, and I just look at that from for me with my legal background from many years ago, that in terms of trying to evidence, because I think we widely accept that there is going to be a breach at some point in time in any organization, and part of that is about being resilient and understanding how you're going to basically evidence the fact that you did take reasonable and appropriate steps. And part of that is about evidencing it. And that's partly what metrics is about. And I'm just wondering whether or not you have any feelings that whether or not just the performance of something and evidencing it is a metric in itself.
No, that's a good question. Because I suppose the point would be is, what is that metric? What are we using that metric for? And if it is for evidencing from a legal perspective, or if we've been asked following an incident from an organizer, from the ICO, for instance, and we're asking, did they receive the training? Yes, they did. Okay, fine, we can say that we've done that. But if we're showing that we've done the training, or we've delivered the training and the individual has done that, but actually there's still an incident has come off the back of that, these things are always going to happen. And you can't look at an organization and a program's effectiveness on isolated incidents. There needs to be a trend. When you start to see the trend, then you can then deal with that. And I think that's where, by setting the metrics at an acceptable tolerance level, gives you an indication as to whether or not you have an issue that you need to deal with, and whether it's a training one or whether it's an operational one. And I think if you can demonstrate that, yes, the intention is, and this is where you come back to your legal process, where you can demonstrate that you've followed reasonable process, is that if you're doing what regulation is asking you to do, you're doing what scheme is asking you to do, you can demonstrate that you've done that. Yes, you're going to have incidents, because we're always going to have incidents and nobody's fallible and accidents do happen, for instance. As long as you can demonstrate there isn't a trend, and where a trend is developing, you're using that metric to say, we've responded by doing some deep dive in that area, or we've delivered some additional training. Then I think the whole thing works. I suppose it depends on what the metric is for and its purpose. But for me, by having a training and an operational metric, and responding to trends rather than incidents, they should work for you.
Okay, that's great. So, yeah, Craig, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, but we do have to bring this to an end.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Hi there, and I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Craig. I knew that it was going to be a really interesting chat with his background being so diverse, his experience of L&D and training within the context of the armed forces, which got its very own specific culture and environment. The work with European Space Agency, I mean, what a great opportunity. And it's so critical. It's so critical. That was a great opportunity for Craig. And then how he's sort of bringing that along, both those two experiences, and then he's now doing that and he's integrating what he's learned in the Nationwide Building Society and as their education and awareness manager. But it's still absolutely fascinating with all that experience to hear him talk about things that lessons and things that he's picking up from the podcast. And in this case, it was, podcast interviews with Stella Collins, Hilary Scala, and Susan Weinschak. So if you haven't listened to those, I strongly recommend that you go and listen to those podcasts. So if you enjoyed the show, I really do hope that you did enjoy the show. And this is the first time you've listened to the show, then what's the best way for you to be able to stay informed about what we're doing here at the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast? Best way probably is to either subscribe via your podcast provider, for example, iTunes, or to visit the marmaladebox.com website and go to the podcast tab and you can subscribe there as well. Another way, which you might find more attractive, is to actually join the Rethinking Human Factor LinkedIn group, which opened up officially 2 weeks ago. And we started to accept members. And that group is going to be used to create discussion, exchange ideas, but also as a platform to make people aware of the work that we're doing here at the podcast, what the latest podcast is, what the future podcasts are going to be, what sort of topics we're going to cover. But it's also going to be a platform where we're going to be sharing research. And just to let you know that in April, we're due to release a research paper, which we've done with our new partner, the Sorbonne University in Paris. And that's going to be looking at embedding information security into business systems. And that's basically based upon interviews over the last 3 years, which we've done via a series of workshops, one-to-one interviews and surveys as well. And I think it presents it's starting to look like it's presenting an interesting picture of the state of affairs, and we'll be releasing that in, I believe, April, end of April. So, we'll keep you informed of those things as they come along. Now, if you want to come on the show, if you want to be like Craig, invited onto the show and come and talk about what you've learned in the last 3 podcasts, but also bring some insights yourself, best way for you to do that, let me just remind you, is podcast at rethinkingthehumanfactor.com. Rethinkingthehumanfactor.com. Drop us a mail. We'll set up a call with you and we'll look to see whether or not we can get you scheduled into the show to come and share your insights. Before you go, I just want to share with you that my program of delivering training, workshops and events for 2019 has now been fully launched. And the first couple of workshops that I will be running will be in London, and then I believe Brussels, and then I believe Edinburgh. And that's all going to be happening March, April and May of this year. If you're interested in attending any of the workshops and sort of being challenged when it comes to education and awareness, then one of the things you do, go to the marmaladebox.com website, have a look at the training tab, and underneath that you'll find a load of stuff in terms of what we're up to into courses and locations and information about those courses. If you've got any inquiries, then the best thing to do is give us a call on the contact details on the website, or pop me an email at bruce.hallas@marmaladebox.com. Right. So who do we have on the show next? Well, the next person we've got on the show is a lady by the name of Charles Sample. If you've listened to the last podcast, you'll know I really made it very, very clear that you've got to listen to this podcast with Charles Sample. All our guests are brilliant, but Char is bringing a very different angle in the context of culture. And it's the reason why Char and I were introduced to each other, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, because we had this shared theory. Char's gone off and explored that from a research perspective, and she's going to be sharing some of those insights And they are really, they do challenge how we consider culture. So I strongly recommend that you stay tuned to that podcast when it comes out, which will be in about 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, right. Well, on a final note, I just want to thank everybody for joining us on the show. I really hope that you found it of some value. As always, I've thoroughly enjoyed bringing a new guest to you, and I look forward to joining you in a couple of weeks. Bye.